I hired you to cook, the mountain man said coldly, his voice carrying across the yard, not to make me fall in love. And now your fat daughter has ruined everything. The words cut through the autumn air like an axe through green pine. The men froze. Laughter that had been half-formed died in their throats. No one expected Duncan MacLeod to speak like that, because no one had ever heard him speak about feelings at all. Iris Cunningham stood beside the cookhouse door, a sack of flour slipping from her arms and bursting open at her feet. White dust bloomed around her boots like mockery. At 500 pounds, she was used to stares, whispers, the quick judgment that came before anyone bothered to learn her name. But this was different. This was public, personal, and devastating. Her cheeks burned as every eye in the lumber camp turned toward her. Some of the loggers looked away, ashamed. Others stared openly, curiosity and pity mixing in equal measure. A few smirked, because frontier cruelty always found room to breathe where power allowed it. Iris swallowed hard. She wanted to disappear into the mountains that loomed behind the camp, dark and indifferent witnesses to her humiliation. She had known better, knew a woman like her had no place stirring feelings in a man like him, especially not Duncan MacLeod. He was a legend in the Wyoming Territory, 6'11", broad as a barn door, a mountain man who bent forests to his will and answered to no one. Men said he could lift a timber beam by himself, that he'd broken a bear's neck with his bare hands, that he'd built this lumber empire from nothing but grief and stubborn resolve. And now he was looking at her like she was a problem that needed to be cut out at the root. Her mother, Martha Cunningham, stepped forward instinctively, her lined face pale with fury and fear. "Mr. MacLeod," she said, voice trembling but firm, "my daughter has done nothing wrong." "Nothing wrong?" Duncan snapped. "This camp runs on order, discipline, clear boundaries, and somehow I let myself forget that." Iris felt tears sting her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had cried enough in her life, in other camps, other towns, other moments when men decided her body gave them the right to judge her worth. If you're listening to this story right now, tell me, where are you listening from in the world? Leave a comment and let me know. Stories like this travel far, and I want to know how far this one reaches. The wind swept down from the Wind River Range, carrying the scent of pine and coming snow. Autumn was tightening its grip, and winter waited just beyond the ridgeline. Harsh, unforgiving, merciless. A season that did not care if a woman was already broken. Iris straightened her shoulders. "I'll leave," she said quietly, her voice barely audible but steady. "If my presence is a distraction, we'll pack tonight." Martha turned on her, horrified. "Iris!" "No," Iris said, still not looking at Duncan. "We've been asked to leave before. We know how this goes." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Duncan MacLeod took a step forward. The ground seemed to tremble under his weight. His massive frame blocked the light, casting a long shadow that fell over Iris and the spilled flour at her feet. Up close, his pale gray-green eyes were stormy, conflicted, nothing like the cold certainty he pretended to project. "That's not what I meant," he said more quietly now. Too quietly. The camp held its breath. Something had cracked, something dangerous, something that could not be undone. And in that moment, standing between humiliation and exile, between fear and a future she could not yet see, Iris Cunningham realized her life was about to change, not gently, not safely, but irrevocably. Before we continue, let me ask you, where are you listening from today? Whether you're at home or on the road, I wish you a warm and joyful Christmas. Now, let's get back to the story. The Wyoming frontier was not kind to women who stood out. It was even less kind to women like Iris Cunningham. From the moment she was born, Iris had been too much of everything for the world around her. Too large, too slow, people assumed, though she was anything but. Too visible in a society that preferred its women small, quiet, and grateful for whatever scraps of decency they were given. At 23, Iris carried her weight with practiced dignity. But that dignity had been earned the hard way. She had learned early how eyes lingered on her body before her face, how whispers followed her through towns like dust devils on a dry road. Fat girl, useless, greedy, lazy, words spoken openly, as if she could not hear them. She had heard them all. Her mother, Martha Cunningham, had raised her to endure. Martha was a woman forged by necessity, broad-shouldered and strong-handed, with the calm authority of someone who had fed hundreds of men through bitter winters and lean years. Cooking was not just a skill for her, it was survival. And Iris had learned beside her not only how to stretch flour and salt into meals that filled bellies, but how to work without complaint, how to take pride in usefulness when the world denied her beauty. In every camp they'd worked, the pattern repeated. At first, suspicion, then tolerance. When Iris proved she could lift sacks, scrub floors, haul water, and work longer hours than men half her size. And then, eventually, cruelty, often delivered with a smile. Men who thought kindness was owed to them. Sons of owners who treated her body like curiosity, a joke, or an opportunity. Iris learned to keep her eyes down, her answers brief, her boundaries firm. Those boundaries had cost them everything once already. The last camp before Duncan MacLeod's had been their breaking point. The owner's son had cornered Iris in the pantry, breath thick with whiskey, laughing as he told her she should be grateful for attention. When she refused him, calmly, clearly, he had smiled and promised she would regret it. By morning, rumors had spread faster than fire in dry brush. Iris was called shameless, accused of throwing herself at men. Martha was dismissed without warning. They were told to leave before sundown. No references, no defense, just exile. So when they arrived at MacLeod's lumber camp, Iris had been careful, painfully careful. She stayed in the kitchen. She avoided conversation. She worked until her back ached and her hands blistered because usefulness was her only shield. And then there was Duncan. Duncan MacLeod had built his life like a fortress, thick walls, narrow gates, no unnecessary openings. He trusted wood, iron, and numbers. He did not trust people, especially not emotions. At 41, he had the reputation of a man carved from stone. He spoke little, he demanded much, and he rewarded competence with fierce loyalty. His men respected him because he was fair, and feared him because he tolerated no weakness. What they did not know was how deeply alone he was, or how much that loneliness frightened him. When Duncan first saw Iris, he noticed her size because it was impossible not to. But what unsettled him was not her body. It was her presence. The quiet way she moved through space, the way she listened, the way she carried herself without apology, even under scrutiny. That unsettled something he had buried years ago. So he did what he always did when faced with discomfort. He tried to control it. He set rules. Clear ones, no interaction, no fraternization. Iris was not to be a distraction for the men, and especially not for him. And for weeks it worked, until it didn't. Now, standing in the yard with flour at her feet and humiliation burning in her chest, Iris felt the old fear returning, the certainty that this was how it ended. Again, another place lost. Another reminder that safety was temporary for women like her. Around them, the camp felt different than it had moments before. The men shifted uneasily. They had seen injustice before. Frontier life was full of it, but they had also seen Iris work. They knew who hauled water in the dark, who remembered their names, who made food taste like home. Duncan saw it too. He saw the way Iris stood straight despite the sting of his words, the way she offered to leave without protest, as if she had rehearsed this moment her entire life. And something in him broke open, because power, he realized too late, was not just in command, it was in restraint. And he had failed. "You're not leaving," he said at last. The words were low, controlled, but they carried. Iris looked up, confusion flickering across her face. "Sir?" Duncan turned to the watching camp. "Everyone back to work. Now." They moved quickly, relieved to be dismissed, but every man knew something significant had just happened. When they were alone, Duncan exhaled slowly, as if steadying himself. "What I said earlier was wrong," he said. "I spoke out of frustration, not truth." Iris said nothing. She had learned that apologies often came with conditions. "This camp owes you respect," Duncan continued, "and so do I." It was not a declaration of love, not yet, but it was something rarer on the frontier: acknowledgement. For the first time since arriving, Iris allowed herself a fragile, dangerous thought. Maybe this place was different. Maybe this mountain man was not like the others, and maybe, just maybe, the injustice that had followed her all her life was about to meet its first real challenge. The journey into the mountains began before dawn. A pale gray light clung to the horizon, barely touching the jagged outlines of the Wind River Range. Frost coated the ground like shattered glass, crunching under boots and wagon wheels. Winter was no longer a threat on the ridgeline. It was a promise. Duncan MacLeod stood beside two loaded wagons, checking harnesses with methodical precision. Supplies were secured, rifles were cleaned, routes were planned and replanned in his head. This was familiar territory for him. Mountains made sense. They were honest. If you respected them, they let you live. People were harder. Iris watched from a short distance, wrapped in a thick wool coat her mother had patched countless times. The air stung her lungs with every breath. She had traveled before, of course, but something about this departure felt different, heavier, as if each mile ahead carried consequence. "You'll ride in the second wagon," Duncan said without looking at her. "It has better balance, less sway." "Thank you," Iris replied. Their conversations had been like this since the incident: careful, restrained, polite to the point of strain. He had not raised his voice again, not once, and that, somehow, unsettled her more than anger would have. The wagons lurched forward as the camp disappeared behind them, swallowed by trees and rising ground. Pines thickened. Snow appeared in stubborn patches, clinging to shadowed slopes. The road narrowed into a rough track carved by logging crews and half-forgotten seasons. Hours passed in the creak of wood and leather. By midday, the wind sharpened. It threaded through the trees like a blade, finding every gap in clothing, every weakness. Iris shifted on the bench, her joints aching from cold and motion. She hated that her body tired faster on journeys like this, hated the way exhaustion felt like confirmation of every cruel assumption ever made about her. The wagon slowed abruptly. Duncan dismounted and walked back, boots sinking into softening snow. "We'll stop here," he said. "Weather's turning." Ahead, the sky darkened unnaturally fast. Clouds rolled low and heavy, swallowing peaks whole. Snow followed soon after, fat, wet flakes that stuck to hair and lashes. Duncan moved efficiently, pitching a temporary shelter between trees, using tarps and rope with the speed of long habit. He worked alone at first, but Iris climbed down and joined him, holding canvas steady with gloved hands. "You don't have to," he said. "I want to," she replied simply. He hesitated, then nodded. By the time the fire was lit, snow had begun to fall in earnest. The world shrank to the glow of flame and the hush of wind. Duncan handed her a tin cup filled with hot broth, something Martha had prepared before they left. "Drink," he said. "It'll help." Iris took it, their fingers brushing for the briefest moment. Heat rushed to her face that had nothing to do with the fire. "Thank you." They sat opposite each other, the fire between them like a boundary neither dared cross. The contrast was stark. Outside, cold and endless white, inside warmth, flickering light, the smell of soup and smoke. Iris felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. "I don't like traveling in storms," she said quietly, "but I like this part, the fire, the quiet." Duncan watched the flames. "Mountains teach you to value small mercies." She studied him, the firelight catching the hard planes of his face, softening them. "You learned young." "Yes." Silence stretched, not uncomfortable, but heavy with things unsaid. Iris wondered if he felt it too, this strange pull between them, this sense that the mountains were pressing them closer together with every mile. That night, Duncan arranged bedding carefully. 2 separate spaces, plenty of distance. He gave her the thicker blanket without comment. "You'll be warmer," he said. "And you?" "I'll manage." She wanted to argue, didn't. Gratitude filled the space words couldn't. The storm raged through the night. Wind howled, snow piled. Iris woke more than once, heart racing, memories of other journeys, other nights when safety had been uncertain. Each time she saw the solid outline of Duncan near the fire, awake, keeping watch. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world transformed. Everything was white and blinding and impossibly still. They continued upward. The trail grew steeper, more treacherous. Ice hid beneath fresh snow. Once, Iris slipped, her breath leaving her in a sharp cry. Duncan was there instantly, steadying her with a firm grip that radiated strength. "I've got you," he said, and she believed him. They crossed a frozen creek by late afternoon. The ice groaned under weight, a sound that raised every hair on Iris's body. Duncan tested each step, then extended his hand to her. "Slowly," he said. "One step at a time." She took his hand. His grip was secure, anchoring. When they reached solid ground, she laughed shakily, relief spilling over. "I don't think I breathed that whole way." He allowed himself a small smile. "You did fine." Praise from him felt different, earned, real. As dusk fell, they reached the cabin. It emerged from the trees like something grown rather than built. Log walls darkened by age, smoke curling from the chimney. Light glowed from the windows, golden against the snow. Iris stopped short. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's home," Duncan said. The word hung between them. Inside, warmth wrapped around them instantly. The cabin was simple but cared for, a sturdy table, shelves of books, a hearth built wide and strong. Everything spoke of intention, of a man who built not for show, but for endurance. Duncan set down their packs. "You'll take the room on the right," he said. "I'll sleep near the fire." Iris nodded, then hesitated. "Duncan?" "Yes?" "I know this journey wasn't easy, for either of us." She searched for the right words. "Thank you for letting me come, for trusting me." He met her gaze, something unguarded flickering there. "Trust," he said slowly, "isn't given. It's learned, and you've earned more than you know." Iris felt tears threaten. She blinked them back. Outside, the wind began to rise again, but inside the cabin, the fire burned steady and bright. For the first time in a very long while, Iris felt something dangerous and hopeful take root. Safety. Life inside the cabin settled into a rhythm neither of them had planned, yet both slowly came to rely on. Mornings began before sunrise. The mountain light crept in pale and quiet through frost-laced windows, turning the snow outside into a field of silver. Iris rose first, careful not to wake Duncan. She learned the cabin sounds quickly, the soft groan of timber in the cold, the faint whistle of wind through the eaves, the muted crackle of embers waiting to be stirred back to life. She tended the fire the way her mother had taught her, coaxing warmth from ash and coal until the room breathed heat again. There was comfort in the routine, comfort in being useful without being watched. When Duncan emerged, already dressed for the cold, there would be coffee waiting and bread warming by the hearth. He never commented on it. He simply nodded once, a gesture that somehow carried more gratitude than words. They ate together at the rough-hewn table, the space between them respectful, deliberate. At first, conversation was sparse. Weather, supplies, the condition of the trail, but as days passed, silences softened. They began to speak of small things. Iris told him about her mother's habit of singing while kneading dough, about the way she'd learned to read by candlelight, trading stories for chores. Duncan spoke of timber contracts and snowfall patterns, of which slopes held ice longest, of the quiet satisfaction of building something that would outlast you. After breakfast, work began. Duncan split wood with steady, practiced swings, each strike precise. Iris swept, cooked, mended clothing, and learned the cabin's needs the way she had learned kitchens all her life. She fed chickens that scratched stubbornly through snow, collected eggs with gloved hands, and discovered that even isolation required constant care. One afternoon, she tried her hand at chopping wood. The axe was heavier than she expected. She lifted it, adjusted her stance the way she'd seen Duncan do, and brought it down. The blade bit shallow, bouncing awkwardly. Duncan appeared at her side without a word. He positioned her hands, corrected her footing, stepped back. "Again," he said. This time, the axe sank true. Iris laughed, breath fogging in the air. "I did it." He nodded, a hint of pride in his eyes. "You did." That night, the wind howled louder than before. Snow battered the cabin walls, relentless. Iris sat by the fire, sewing a tear in her coat, listening to the storm rage beyond the door. Duncan poured stew into bowls, setting hers down first before serving himself. It was a small thing. He did it every time. And every time, Iris noticed, they ate in companionable quiet, the fire painting warm shadows across the room. Afterward, Duncan retrieved a book from the shelf, a weathered volume of Scottish poetry. "I didn't know you read," Iris said softly. I don't often, he admitted, but sometimes. He cleared his throat and read aloud, his deep voice careful, with unfamiliar words. The cadence was rough, imperfect, and entirely sincere. Iris listened, heart tightening. No one had read to her since her father died. Days passed. Weeks. The cabin became a refuge not just from the cold, but from memory. Iris felt herself changing. The constant vigilance she carried, watching for cruelty, bracing for dismissal, began to loosen its grip. She laughed more, spoke more freely, sang while cooking, soft at first, then louder when she realized Duncan never told her to stop. He never interrupted her singing. Sometimes he sat outside, listening through the door, pretending not to. One evening, as dusk settled thick and blue around the cabin, Iris stood at the window, watching snow fall in heavy silence. "It's beautiful," she said, "but it's also frightening. All this space, all this quiet." Duncan joined her, standing close but not touching. "The mountains don't judge," he said. "They don't care what you look like or where you come from. They only care whether you respect them." She turned to him. "I think that's why I like it here." He met her gaze, something unspoken passing between them. For a moment, it felt as if the world narrowed to the space they shared. Then he stepped back. Boundaries remained, but they were gentler now. The first real test came in midwinter. A supply run took longer than expected. Darkness fell early, cold biting hard. When Duncan did not return by nightfall, Iris paced the cabin, worry gnawing at her. She told herself she was being foolish. He knew these mountains better than anyone. Still, when the door finally opened and he stepped inside, snow-covered and exhausted, relief flooded her so fast her knees nearly buckled. "You're late," she said, unable to hide the tremor in her voice. He frowned. Trail collapsed. Took a longer route. She pressed her lips together, then did something she hadn't planned. She embraced him. It was brief, awkward, and utterly honest. Duncan froze, then slowly lifted one massive arm, resting it lightly against her back, not pulling her closer, but not pushing her away either. "I was worried," she murmured. "I know," he said quietly. They separated quickly, both breathing a little harder than before. That night, Iris lay awake, staring at the low wooden ceiling, heart racing. She wondered how something so small could feel so dangerous. Because danger, she had learned, often came disguised as hope. Over time, Duncan began to speak of things he had never shared, of his parents' deaths, of the years he spent working himself numb because grief had no other outlet, of the belief, long held, that love was a liability men like him could not afford. "I didn't plan this," he admitted one night, staring into the fire. "This life, this closeness." "Neither did I," Iris replied. The honesty between them became a quiet foundation. They did not rush, did not name what was growing. But it was there, in the way Duncan always made sure her boots were dry by the fire, in the way Iris saved the best portion of food for him without comment. Winter deepened its hold, but inside the cabin, warmth endured, and with it, a fragile, luminous hope. The first sign of trouble came on a morning so quiet it felt unnatural. The snow outside the cabin lay untouched, smooth as linen. No wind stirred the trees. Even the birds were silent. Duncan noticed it immediately. Mountains, like men, rarely went still without reason. He was lacing his boots when Iris emerged from her room, holding a folded piece of paper in her hands. Her face was pale, her mouth set in a line he had come to recognize as restraint rather than calm. "Duncan," she said, "we need to talk." He straightened. "What is it?" She hesitated, then handed him the paper. This arrived with the last supply drop. It was addressed to my mother, but it concerns me. Duncan unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was sharp, confident, the kind of hand that belonged to men who were used to being obeyed. "You can't hide her forever. We know where you are. Return what belongs to us, or we will come take it." No signature was needed. Duncan felt something cold settle in his chest. "Who sent this?" Iris exhaled slowly. "The railroad men, and the sheriff who works with them." He looked up sharply. "Sheriff Harlan?" She nodded. The name carried weight in the territory. Harlan was known for two things: taking bribes and using the law as a weapon when money demanded it. Duncan had avoided him deliberately, keeping his operations far from town politics. "Why are they interested in you?" Duncan asked. Iris moved to the table and sat, folding her hands as if to keep them from shaking. "Because my father didn't just come from Scotland with songs," she said. "He came with papers." Duncan said nothing, waiting. "When he died," Iris continued, "my mother found a deed sewn into his coat lining. Land rights, mountain land, rich with timber and minerals. He'd been granted it years earlier, before the railroad expanded west, before men like Harlan started rewriting borders." Understanding dawned slowly and grimly. "They want the land," Duncan said. "Yes, but the deed is in my name." Iris swallowed. "Because my father knew no one would look twice at a fat girl, he thought I'd be invisible, safe." Duncan's jaw tightened. "They threatened you before." "Yes, in town. That was why we kept moving, why we never stayed anywhere long." Her voice wavered despite her effort. "The camp where we were ruined, it wasn't just about the owner's son. Harlan was involved. He wanted leverage. When I refused, they made an example of me." Rage burned hot and sharp in Duncan's chest. "They won't touch you," he said. "Not here." Iris met his eyes. "They will try." And they did not wait long. 2 days later, hoofbeats echoed through the trees. Duncan was outside splitting wood when he heard them. 3 riders emerged from the forest edge. Dark coats, polished boots, the unmistakable air of men who believed the law bent toward them. Sheriff Harlan rode at the center. "Well now," Harlan drawled, swinging down from his horse, "if it isn't Duncan MacLeod, king of the mountains." Duncan rested the axe head against the stump, but did not release it. "You're a long way from your jurisdiction." Harlan smiled thinly. "Funny thing about jurisdiction. It follows interests." His gaze slid past Duncan toward the cabin, toward the smoke rising from the chimney. "And there she is," he said softly. "The girl." Iris stepped into the doorway before Duncan could stop her. She stood tall, shoulders squared, fear present but mastered. "You have no right to be here," she said. Harlan laughed, spoken like someone who's been told that before. Duncan moved between them, his massive frame an immovable barrier. "Say what you came to say and leave." Harlan's smile vanished. "We're here to reclaim stolen property. That land deed of yours, it's inconvenient, confusing, bad for development." "It's legal," Iris said, "and you know it." "Legal," Harlan echoed, tasting the word. "Law is flexible, Miss Cunningham, especially when no one believes you." The insult was deliberate, calculated. Duncan's voice dropped. "You'll leave, now." Harlan's hand hovered near his holster. "Careful, MacLeod. You shoot a sheriff, you become a problem even the mountains can't hide." Iris took a breath. "I won't give you the deed," she said clearly, "and I won't be silent any more." Harlan looked at her, then really looked, and for a moment something like uncertainty flickered. He had expected tears, begging, shame, not resolve. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said. "Come back to town. We'll sort this out properly." "No," Iris said. Duncan felt it then. Pride, fierce and undeniable. Harlan's eyes hardened. "You have until the end of winter," he said. "After that we won't ask." The riders turned and disappeared back into the trees, leaving silence in their wake. Inside the cabin, Iris finally let herself sit. Her hands trembled now. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I brought danger to your door." Duncan knelt in front of her, his presence steady, grounding. "You didn't bring it," he said. "It came because weak men fear what they can't control." She looked at him, tears brimming. "They'll come back." "Yes," he said, "and we'll be ready." That night, Duncan cleaned his rifle by firelight. Iris watched from the table, the deed papers spread before her like fragile proof of a life she had never been allowed to claim. "I never wanted land," she said quietly. "I just wanted peace." Duncan looked up. "Sometimes you have to fight for the right to be left alone." She nodded slowly. Outside, the wind returned, rattling the cabin walls. The mountains listened, and far below, men who believed power belonged to them alone began planning how to take what was not theirs. The confrontation came at dawn, as Duncan had known it would. Violence rarely announced itself at night in the mountains. Men who intended to take something came in daylight, convinced the sun made them righteous. The sound of horses broke the stillness just as the sky began to pale. Iris was already awake, sitting at the table with the deed papers folded neatly beside her, as if order alone might keep the world from unraveling. Duncan looked out the window once and understood immediately. "They're here," he said. 5 riders this time. Sheriff Harlan led them again, but he was no longer pretending this was a discussion. 2 railroad men flanked him, hard-eyed and armed. The others were hired muscle, the kind drawn by pay and permission rather than belief. Duncan reached for his coat and rifle. Iris stood. "This is because of me." "This is because they think you're alone," Duncan replied. "They're wrong." He stepped outside before they could knock, closing the door behind him with deliberate calm. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he walked forward, stopping several paces from the riders. He stood tall, unarmed in appearance, though the rifle rested within easy reach against the cabin wall. Harlan dismounted slowly, savoring the moment. "Mornin', MacLeod. Thought we'd save ourselves some trouble." "You've already wasted enough breath," Duncan said. "Leave." Harlan's smile was tight. "We're done asking." He gestured, and one of the railroad men produced a folded document. "This land deed is being nullified. New claim, new ownership." Duncan didn't look at it. "You can't erase a lawful deed because it inconveniences you." Harlan's gaze flicked toward the cabin. "Then bring her out." The words landed like a challenge. The door opened before Duncan could respond. Iris stepped onto the threshold, the morning light catching her face. She wore her thick coat, her hair braided tightly back, her hands empty. She looked frightened. She did not look weak. "I'm here," she said. "Say it to me." Harlan's eyes narrowed. "You're making a mistake." "No," Iris replied. Her voice trembled only slightly. "I've been silent my whole life. That was the mistake." She stepped down beside Duncan. "I own that land," she continued. legally, morally, and I will not give it to men who think threats are the same as authority?" One of the hired men laughed. "You think anyone's going to back you? A fat woman and a mountain brute hiding from town law?" That was when Duncan moved. It was not sudden. It was not reckless. It was the controlled violence of a man who understood exactly how much force was required. He stepped forward, towering over the speaker, his presence alone a warning. "You will mind your tongue," he said quietly, "or you will leave this mountain on a stretcher." Hands drifted toward holsters. The moment balanced on a knife's edge. Iris spoke again. "You don't scare me anymore," she said, looking directly at Harlan. "You never did. You just taught me to doubt myself." Harlan's jaw tightened. "Enough." He reached for his gun. The rifle came up in Duncan's hands in a single smooth motion, aimed not at Harlan's chest, but at the ground inches from his boot. The shot cracked through the cold air, echoing off the mountains. Snow exploded upward. Every horse reared. One man swore. Another fumbled his reins. "This is your warning," Duncan said. "You are trespassing. You are threatening a lawful landowner, and you are done." For the first time, doubt crept fully into Harlan's expression. He had expected fear. He had expected compliance. He had not expected resistance that carried weight. "You'd shoot a sheriff?" Harlan said. "I'd defend my home," Duncan replied. "There's a difference." Silence followed, thick and dangerous. Iris felt her heart pounding, but she did not step back. She stood at Duncan's side, her presence no longer hidden behind him, but aligned with him. Harlan assessed the situation the way men like him always did, calculating risk against reward. Mountains had witnesses. So did dead men. "This isn't over," he said finally. Duncan nodded once. "No, it ends now." The sheriff mounted his horse without another word. The others followed, retreating the way they had come, smaller somehow against the vastness of the land they had thought to claim. When the last sound of hoofbeats faded, Iris exhaled shakily. "It's done," she whispered, not quite believing it. Duncan turned to her. His expression was fierce, protective, and beneath it all, something dangerously tender. "No one will ever take you from this place," he said, "or from me." Her composure broke then. Tears spilled down her cheeks, not from fear, but from release. She had stood her ground. Inside the cabin, the fire still burned. Outside, the mountain stood unchanged, ancient and indifferent, yet somehow approving. That morning, something shifted permanently. The world had come to the door and been turned away. The cabin glowed that night like a promise kept. Snow piled softly against the walls, muffling the world beyond, but inside there was warmth, steady, breathing warmth born of firelight and quiet resolve. Iris sat at the table, her hands wrapped around a mug she had forgotten to drink from, watching the flames dance in the hearth. The danger had passed, but its echo remained. Duncan moved through the cabin with unhurried purpose, checking the latch on the door, setting the rifle back in its place, tending the fire until it burned low and safe. He did not pace. He did not speak much. But everything he did said the same thing. This place is protected. When he finally sat across from her, the silence between them felt different than it ever had before. Not tentative, not restrained, honest. "You didn't have to stand beside me," he said quietly. "You could have stayed inside." Iris lifted her eyes to his. "I spent my whole life hiding behind doors," she replied. "I won't do it any more." He studied her for a long moment, as if seeing her anew, not as someone he needed to shield, but as someone who chose to stand. "That took courage," he said. She gave a small, tired smile. "So did not pushing me back inside." The wind brushed the cabin walls, gentler now, almost curious. Outside, the mountains lay vast and indifferent, yet Iris felt something she had never felt before in her life. Belonging. Duncan rose and added another log to the fire. The flames flared, casting gold across the room, across the rough-hewn beams, across the simple table where so many unspoken truths had taken root. "You're safe here," he said at last. The words were simple, but they landed with the weight of a vow. Iris's throat tightened. "I've never been safe anywhere," she whispered. "Not really." He turned to her fully then. "You are now, and not because I say so, because this place is yours if you want it, not as shelter, as home." Tears slipped free, silent and unashamed. Iris stood slowly, every movement deliberate, as if afraid the moment might shatter if rushed. "Home," she repeated softly. "I don't know if I remember how to have one." Duncan stepped closer, not touching yet, giving her space even now. "Then we'll learn," he said. "Together." She nodded, unable to trust her voice. They sat by the fire long into the night, shoulders close, sometimes brushing, sometimes not. They spoke of small things, spring planting, repairs the cabin would need, the possibility of chickens surviving the winter, ordinary plans, revolutionary in their quiet permanence. At one point, Iris leaned her head back against the chair, exhaustion finally claiming her. Duncan noticed immediately. "Come," he said gently. "You should rest." He led her to the room on the right, stopping at the doorway as he always did. Boundaries still mattered. Respect still mattered. Before she went inside, Iris turned back to him. "Duncan?" "Yes?" "If the world comes again," she said, "if it tries to take this from us, will we be enough?" He did not answer quickly. He did not offer comfort without truth. "We may not be enough for the whole world," he said at last, "but we are enough for this mountain and for each other." She smiled through tears. "That's all I ever wanted." The door closed softly. Duncan remained by the fire after, staring into the embers, something fierce and gentle settling into his chest. He had built his life on solitude because it was safe. And yet here, in the quiet aftermath of conflict, he realized something profound. Solitude had kept him alive, but connection had made him whole. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering tracks, smoothing scars, giving the land a chance to begin again. Inside the cabin, a future waited, uncertain, fragile, and real. The fire burned on, and the question lingered unspoken but alive in the quiet glow of that mountain home. Would love be strong enough to stand against the world beyond the trees? Every time I read your comments, I'm reminded that stories like this do more than entertain. They travel across borders, across languages, across lives that may look nothing alike on the surface, yet feel the same things deep inside. If this story reached you, I'd love to know where you're listening from in the world. Share it in the comments and let others see how far this mountain story has traveled. And if you still believe that love can grow in the harshest places, that dignity is stronger than cruelty, and that home is something we can choose, stay with me. The next story will be waiting for you.